Hi, good evening. I hope you had a good Saturday. Half the weekend has gone, and it's been a bit quiet on Giri's Adda since today morning. And as I have mentioned earlier, I'm going to be bringing you some reflections on the national education policy in this episode, and also tomorrow review a book and perhaps slip in a few songs before the weekend gets over. So let me then start with what I call as my micro take on the National Education Policy 2020. It's been 34 years since this country had education policy, a new education policy. The last one was in 1986 during the Congress-led government, and it was made more operational in a program of action document in 1992. So many things have happened in these 34 years. I think by and large the emphasis on universalization, the emphasis on ensuring that every child gets a primary schooling and elementary schooling of a certain quality. This also led the Indian government to design these large-scale schemes, starting from the Operation Blackboard, the District Primary Education Program in the 90s. Of course, that was preceded by a few state-led initiatives that were funded by external agencies. And then we've had the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which extended the DPEP to look at elementary education, that is up to grade 8. And I think the 90s onwards, there's been a lot of external funding into education. The World Bank, the European Union, the Canadian International Development Agency, the Swedish, and whole host of others. Not without debates, of course, because the World Bank doesn't give a grant, it gives a loan. And of course there were questions about why should we take a loan from an external agency to educate our own children, and so on and so forth. There have been considerable gains as well. A lot more schools have opened, a lot more teachers are on board, and a lot more children, more importantly, are now within the fold of the formal and organized system of learning that we call as school. That said, I think 34 years is really a long time for any nation to be waiting for an education policy, given the fact that so many things have happened. So let's move ahead and see what this document says. I want to make some qualifying statements before I start sharing my reflections. The first thing is that I am not going to be doing a very comprehensive review of this document all at once. That can become a very long episode and a very lengthy process of reflection. I would rather dissect it bit by bit, theme by theme, or chapter by chapter, whatever it is, to bring different facets of this policy to kind of debate the different things that it says, to try and read in between the line and see what it doesn't say, and so on and so forth, or what it says differently but is not mentioned explicitly there. So that's one thing that I want to say up front. On the other hand, what I want to do now in the beginning is to identify something that is of a deeper nature and reflect upon that, and try and gain some understanding through that process. There's a lot of detail in the policy which I think I would like to leave out for now. And even this reflection is something that is my own very personal take, and it doesn't, of course, constitute a very comprehensive set of reflections. However, as we go along in the coming weeks, I hope to look at the policy more closely and more comprehensively and bring you my reflections, and I look forward to good discussions on Giri's Adda and good exchanges on this as we go along. Sorry. So let me begin this reflection on this document by reading out from the introduction, because the introduction to a policy often sets out the framework of that policy and lays out the whole document. And I want to start with some statements that are being made over here and then go back and forth. I'll also be traveling a little back in time to make my points and so on. So the policy begins by acknowledging that the world is undergoing rapid changes in the knowledge landscape, and here things like developments in the world of IT and the way this is impacting society, people, lives, and most certainly education. So the policy mentions about how artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, etc. are huge and often tumultuous changes that we are all experiencing as people, as governments, as institutions, and so on. And along with that, there is an acknowledgement, of course, of climate change being the new reality now, and epidemics, the more recent development. We've all been, our lives have irreversibly changed because of COVID-19. We don't know when this is going to be brought under control, and we also realize that this has made us sit up and prepare ourselves better for such occurrences in the future. The policy, of course, goes on further, and it says, indeed, with the quickly changing employment landscape and global ecosystem, it is becoming increasingly critical that children not only learn, but more importantly, learn to learn. So I think this is an important point, that learning for itself and learning how to learn is an intrinsic thing. It's not for an external reason, always like an examination or a passport to a better job, but the whole issue of how do you develop a disposition or a mindset to that enables you to learn, and because that learning brings a lot of nimble-footedness, a lot of agility as far as the individual is concerned, as far as self-confidence and socialization, etc. is concerned. It goes on, of course, but more importantly, learn to learn. Think critically and solve problems. Creative and multidisciplinary nature is, expressed over here. I think if there's one word in the entire document, it is multidisciplinary, that comes up many a times. How to innovate, adapt, absorb new materials, and how the pedagogy, that is the science, and also sometimes it's also called as the art and science of making children learn, how that should become more experiential, holistic, integrated. These are all big words. Inquiry driven, discovery oriented, learner centered, and of course enjoyable. So this is how the policy document opens up the grand canvas, and situates the whole thing very globally, and looks at what needs to be, in which direction education should move given these kind of developments. The policy also further talks about a spectrum of things that children ought to be learning, ranging from arts, crafts, humanities, games, sports, fitness, language, literature, culture, and not to forget maths and science. It then goes on to talk about how education must build character and how the learners should develop as ethical human beings who are guided by ethical considerations, rational human beings, compassionate and caring. And in the introductory section, the policy also goes on to talk about or emphasize the development of the creative potential of each individual, that there's a lot within each one of us, and then it's up to the process of education to draw that out, draw that potential, and express it more fully. The policy also talks about a very critical and perhaps a central aspect, which is that the teacher must be at the center of the fundamental reforms, any fundamental reforms of the education system. Therefore, there's a whole range of reforms in the policy that involve not only money, I'll come to that in a minute, but also I think it's very clear that there has to be a different way of looking at things. A rethinking in some sense is something that is hinted at and it is called for. This is where I would like to examine some of this from a bit of a historical standpoint and make my point as well. It is not as if this is the first policy that independent India has had, first education policy. The last one, of course, was 1986, as I said, during the Rajiv Gandhi government. The one before that, which was unveiled by Indira Gandhi, was in 1968. And the 1968 education policy was informed to a large extent by a very seminal document called as the Kothari Commission report. And this was commissioned, I think, during the time of Jawaharlal Nehru, and it completed its documentation and so on in 1964 to 66. And the Kothari Commission document is even today considered to be some sort of a Bible in terms of the kind of things that it envisioned for India vis-a-vis education. And many of the things that the Kothari Commission has said are very, very relevant even today. But how does the NEP, the National Education Policy of 2020, look at this trajectory and these previous policy attempts and documents? It just very cursorily and almost perfunctorily mentions that there was this policy in 86 which sought to look at access and coverage and look at disparities in society and so on and so forth. It talks about I think it mentions the 1968 policy also in a similar vein, just about 3 or 4 lines in that particular section. And then it goes on to talk about the right to education that was notified by the Congress government in 2009, that was brought into effect. It's a fundamental constitutional right, but it doesn't say anything more. So one thing that strikes you when you go through this section particularly, and what I would have expected is something that is largely missing here. I would have expected an analysis, a very, very cogent, honest reflection on what went right and what went wrong in all these years. A few instances I think I would like to give over here. One is, of course, the issue of allocating 6% of GDP for education is not new. It is something that the Kothari Commission mentioned, and it was reiterated in 1968. So what have we done in 5.5 decades to operationalize this? And why haven't we been able to do it? Because in the NEP of 2020 also, you have this point that is being mentioned that, we should allocate where finances are concerned and financial obligations or commitments are concerned, it should be 6% of the GDP. But then that is, there is no analysis of why that has not happened. Is it lack of political will? Did we have money? What are the issues there? I think that's something that, so on the whole, in a policy document, which is largely a document that is a document of intent, but then let's remember that this is a document in the public domain, so therefore it speaks to the people of India. What I find missing, and I would say in a sense it's disappointing to see this not included, is this whole analysis of why were we not able to do certain things. And this analysis is important because in 2020, many of the big things that have been talked about here in terms of holistic, integrated, inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centered, these are all not new terms. They have been bandied around. They've been talked about since Kothari Commission days, 55 years ago, or possibly even earlier in earlier education commissions like the Mudaliar Commission and and many other documents. But in 2020, when one looks at the landscape and when one looks at the evidence that is available through the National Achievement Surveys, through the ASER reports and so on, in terms of the outputs, in terms of the so-called outputs, we find that the picture is very alarming. And it's very clear that what children are meant to be learning at the primary and elementary stages in school, they are not learning that, and they go on, they continue with huge deficits. Of course, one of the arguments is that it's because of the right to education which is promoted, automatic promotion, and therefore that is happening. But then evidence doesn't show that the argument is right, and the right to education never anywhere said that children shouldn't be learning. So it's more like a convenient interpretation. So even after 55 years of the Kothari Commission report, if this is the halat, this is the condition of the learning in schools, then there is something wrong, and I think it really requires a much deeper analysis, which is not present in this document, as to what is it that has gone wrong. If children are not learning and learning well, and if the processes of teaching and learning are not inquiry driven, this document talks about moving away from rote, right? And there's a sense of deja vu when you hear that, because moving away from rote is something that you heard in the Kothari Commission document also. In fact, the Kothari Commission document began with a grand statement, said that the destiny of a nation is now being shaped in its classrooms. So it was very clear that the classrooms are supposed to be spaces for inquiry, for questioning, and for debate, reflection, and so on. And it went on to say that in a world based on science and technology, it is education that determines the level of prosperity and welfare of and security of people. So the same concerns keep coming again and again, decade after decade, decade after decade, but we don't really know, what is wrong and what needs to be done to set this right. I just want to further reinforce that point that I'm making by also sharing a personal anecdote, a personal story, a bit of a short personal story. So in 2007, I was in the district of Kargil in the Ladakh region. I was invited by the Hill Development Council to help them strengthen their education and their schooling system. And I worked there for about almost a year and a half or so, kept going and coming very frequently. We analyzed, we did a lot of classroom observations to actually see what was happening inside the classrooms. And we found that on an average, children asked about 1 to 1.5 questions to the teacher in those classrooms. This is what our observational data showed, and we did a quantitative analysis. And even those 1.5 questions were of a factual kind. A child saying, okay, I didn't hear you say this, can you tell me again? Or, saying yes or no or whatever. So these were very factual. They were not even questions that were enabling deeper reflection. Since then, I've been interested a lot in classroom observation studies, and admittedly, there are not many, but the few that one has seen very clearly show that the classrooms as envisaged in these documents are not the classrooms in reality. And I think there begins the problem. I think we need to really look at, if all these grand ideas have to be implemented, and all these grand terms have to be given meaning in action, then we need to understand why even in 2020 our classrooms are still based on rote, and why is the teacher not allowing for inquiry to happen, for questioning to happen. And I think that perhaps is also a reflection of the way we look at teachers, the way we look at our own institutions in terms of lack of trust and so on. So perhaps, and I'm going to probably emphasize on this point as we move along later, this whole issue of centralization, not letting go, holding on, and so on and so forth. If the teacher is doing that in the classroom, then the entire apparatus that nurtures the teacher or is supposed to nurture the teacher is also not doing its job. And why is that not happening? And why even in 2020 are we languishing at the bottom of international rankings, not only in student outcomes, but on a whole range of other educational parameters? So I think the other point in the same spirit that I want to mention is that a policy and a legislation are different. The Right to Education Act is a legislation. It is justiciable. A government can be pulled up for not implementing the Right to Education Act. And the Right to Education Act is a fundamental right, constitutional right of every child in this country. So far, we haven't had questions like, people going to the courts with questions like, look, my child's school is not child-centered. I don't think there's inquiry-based learning happening. So what is the government doing about it? Now, unfortunately, we have made the legislation a piece of paper. It is not implemented. It is referred to more like a scheme kind of a document. And so it is these questions that I think beg deeper, reflections that need to be really dissected, and a lot of insights have to come in terms of what went right and what went wrong, and how moving forward in the next 10 or 20 years we will be able to meet the grand visions that this document envisages. There is nothing to fault it in terms of the articulation of those visions. It's, I think, the lack of putting you haven't put the finger on the pulse to find out what has not worked. And if we had done that a little more, in fact a lot more in this document, I think we would all been we would have all profited in terms of what it had to say. So right now, this is all I have to say about the NEP 2020. I hope you like these little bit of reflection from my side. See you tomorrow with something else, and we will continue this NEP journey. Bye bye. Take care.